This is my true story. I stood at my wife's grave watching them lower her casket into the ground, and I felt like I was being buried with her. We had 40 years together, and I thought I knew everything about her. But 3 days after her funeral, I found a letter hidden inside her old Bible, and when I read the last line, my hands started shaking. Everything I thought I knew about our life together was about to change. She had kept a secret from me for 4 decades, and now she was gone, and I could never ask her why. Before I tell you what the letter said, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe, so this story reaches people who need to hear it. We built our life together from absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing. When we got married, we had $200 between us, and we spent half of it on our wedding at the courthouse. We rented a tiny apartment with cracked walls and a bathroom so small you could barely turn around in it. Our furniture came from thrift stores and garage sales, and our first bed was a mattress on the floor until I saved enough to buy a cheap frame. We ate pasta and rice most nights because that was all we could afford, and we joked that we were living like college students even though we were both 25 years old. I worked construction during the day and stocked shelves at a grocery store at night while she worked as a secretary at a law firm downtown. We saved every dollar we could, and after 3 years, we finally had enough for a down payment on a small house in a neighborhood that was not great, but it was ours. The house needed work and the roof leaked when it rained hard and the furnace broke down every winter, but we fixed things ourselves and made it into a home. We painted the walls together and planted flowers in the front yard and hung curtains she sewed by hand because we could not afford to buy new ones. We had 2 kids and raised them in that house and taught them that money did not matter as much as family and hard work and being kind to people. Our son was born first and then our daughter 3 years later, and we gave them everything we could, even though it was never much. We could not afford fancy vacations or expensive toys, but we had dinner together every night and we read to them before bed and we showed up to every school event and sports game no matter how tired we were. They grew up happy and loved, and that was all that mattered to us. My wife was my anchor through every storm that tried to knock us down. When I lost my construction job during the recession, she held me while I cried and told me we would figure it out together. She took on extra hours at work and I found odd jobs wherever I could, and we made it through without losing our house. When her mother died suddenly, she fell apart, and I held her the same way she had held me, and we got through that too. When I had a heart scare at 50 and spent 3 days in the hospital, she never left my side, and when the doctor said I needed to change my lifestyle, she changed hers too, so I would not feel alone. We had quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper spread out on the kitchen table. We did not talk much during those mornings because we did not need to. We just sat together in comfortable silence, and that was enough. We had inside jokes that nobody else understood, and we had routines we followed without thinking because we had done them together for so long. She knew I liked my coffee black with 2 sugars, and I knew she liked hers with cream and no sugar. She knew I hated mushrooms, and I knew she hated onions. We knew each other so completely that we could finish each other's sentences. I thought I knew every corner of her heart and every memory she carried and every dream she had ever dreamed. I thought 40 years of marriage meant there were no secrets left between us. I thought we had shared everything that mattered and that we would grow old together and eventually die together after living a simple, quiet life. We talked about retiring and traveling to places we had never been and spending time with our grandchildren. We talked about selling the house and moving somewhere warm where my joints would not ache so much in the winter. But then she got sick and everything changed in ways I never saw coming. The cancer showed up in her lungs and spread faster than anyone expected. The doctors gave her 6 months, but she only made it 3. I watched her fade away in our bedroom, and I held her hand and told her I loved her every single day until she could not respond anymore. I thought I was losing my wife, but I had no idea I was also losing the truth about who she really was. In her final weeks, something changed, and she became distant in a way I had never seen before. She would stare out the bedroom window for hours without saying a word, and when I asked what she was thinking about, she would just shake her head and smile weakly. She stopped wanting to talk about memories or the kids or anything that used to make her happy. It felt like she was already halfway gone, and I was losing her faster than the cancer was taking her. I caught her writing letters late at night when she thought I was asleep. I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and find her sitting up in bed with papers spread across her lap and a pen in her shaking hand. The lamp on her nightstand would be on, and she would be writing slowly and carefully, like every word mattered more than anything. When I asked who she was writing to, she would quickly gather the papers and tuck them under her pillow and tell me it was nothing important. One night I got up to use the bathroom, and when I came back, I saw her folding a letter and sliding it into an envelope. She pressed the seal closed with her thin fingers and then hid it inside her Bible on the nightstand. She did not know I was watching from the doorway, and when I cleared my throat, she jumped like I had caught her doing something wrong. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was just getting her affairs in order and making sure everything would be taken care of after she was gone. I told her we did not need to talk about that yet, and that she still had time left with us. She looked at me with tired eyes and said she needed to do this now, while she still could, because there were things I needed to know. I asked her what things, and she said I would understand soon enough. I tried to push her to tell me what she meant, but she refused and said it was not the right time. She told me to trust her and let her handle things her way, and I agreed because I did not want to upset her in her final days. She started asking me strange questions about our life together. She asked me if I had ever regretted marrying her, or if I ever wished we had more money or a bigger house or a different life. I told her I had never regretted a single day with her and that I would choose her again every single time. She cried when I said that and held my hand so tightly it hurt. She told me she loved me more than I would ever know and that I was the best thing that ever happened to her. Her mood would shift suddenly from sad to almost panicked. She would ask me to promise that I would read everything she left for me and that I would not be angry with her. I promised without understanding what I was promising, because I just wanted to make her feel better. She would relax a little after that, but I could tell something was weighing on her mind and eating away at her from the inside. I thought grief was playing tricks on both our minds and that she was struggling to accept that she was dying. I thought maybe she was writing goodbye letters to the kids, or leaving instructions for her funeral, or trying to organize things so I would not be overwhelmed after she passed. I never imagined she was hiding something massive from me, or that the letters she wrote in the middle of the night contained secrets she had carried for our entire marriage. Her doctor told me that patients near the end often became confused or emotional, and that I should not worry too much about her strange behavior. He said it was normal for dying people to withdraw and become distant as they prepared to let go. I believed him because I wanted to believe there was a medical explanation for the wall that had suddenly appeared between us. I wish now that I had pushed harder and demanded to know what she was hiding, but I was too afraid of upsetting her and making her final days more difficult than they already were. 3 days after the funeral, I stood alone in our bedroom, surrounded by her things, and I did not know where to start. Her clothes still hung in the closet, and her shoes were still lined up by the door, and her reading glasses were still on the nightstand where she had left them. The room smelled like her perfume and her medicine and the lavender soap she always used. I sat on the edge of our bed and cried because everything in that room reminded me that she was gone and never coming back. Our daughter had offered to help me pack up her mother's belongings, but I told her I needed to do it alone. I needed time with my wife's things and time to say goodbye to the life we had shared in that room for 40 years. I opened her dresser drawers slowly and touched her sweaters and her scarves and the jewelry box I had given her on our 10th anniversary. Everything felt sacred and untouchable, like I was disturbing something holy by going through her private things. I moved to the nightstand on her side of the bed and opened the drawer where she kept her tissues and hand lotion and lip balm. Her old Bible was sitting on top of the nightstand where it had been for as long as I could remember. She read it every night before bed, and she had written notes in the margins and underlined passages that meant something to her. I picked it up carefully and held it in my hands and felt the weight of all the years she had spent reading those pages. When I lifted the Bible, a cream-colored envelope slipped out from between the pages and fell onto the bed. My heart started pounding before I even saw my name written on the front in her shaking handwriting. I recognized her writing immediately, even though it looked weaker and less steady than it used to. She had written my name in blue ink, and the letters were slightly crooked, like her hand had been trembling when she wrote them. I sat down on the bed, holding the envelope and staring at my name. Part of me did not want to open it because I was afraid of what might be inside. I remembered how secretive she had been in her final weeks, and how she had begged me to promise I would read everything she left for me. I knew this letter was important, and that whatever was inside would change something, but I did not know what or how. I turned the envelope over and saw that she had sealed it carefully and pressed the flap down hard like she did not want it to accidentally open. I could see where her fingers had pressed along the seal, and I imagined her sitting in our bed late at night sealing this letter while I slept beside her. I wondered how long she had carried this secret, and how many times she had almost told me before deciding to write it down instead. My hands were already shaking as I broke the seal and pulled out the folded pages inside. There were 3 pages covered front and back with her handwriting, and I could see that some words were crossed out and rewritten, like she had struggled to find the right way to say what she needed to say. The paper felt thin and delicate in my hands, and I was afraid I might tear it accidentally. I unfolded the pages slowly and saw that the letter started with the words, "My dearest love," written at the top. My throat tightened, and tears blurred my vision before I even started reading. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and took a deep breath and told myself I needed to be strong enough to read whatever she had written. I needed to honor her by reading her words and understanding what she had been trying to tell me. I looked around our empty bedroom one more time before I started reading. The sun was coming through the window and lighting up the dust particles floating in the air. Everything felt still and quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for me to discover the truth my wife had hidden from me for 40 years. The letter started with love and gratitude and words that made my chest ache. She thanked me for 40 years of faithfulness and kindness, and for being the man she had always hoped to find. She wrote about our wedding day and how nervous she had been standing in that courthouse in a borrowed dress with flowers from the grocery store. She said she had known right then that marrying me was the best decision she would ever make in her entire life. She thanked me for working 2 jobs to help us save for our house and for never complaining when money was tight and we had to eat the same cheap meals every week. She thanked me for being a good father to our children and for showing up to every school play and every soccer game even when I was exhausted from working all day. She said I had given her a life filled with real love and simple happiness, and that she had never wanted anything more than what we built together. She wrote about the Sunday mornings we spent drinking coffee in silence and how those quiet moments meant more to her than anything money could buy. She said she loved the way I still held her hand when we walked through the grocery store and the way I kissed her forehead before we went to sleep every night. She said she had watched me grow older and she had loved every version of me, from the young man who married her with $200 to the gray-haired man who held her hand while she was dying. I was crying by the 3rd paragraph, but I kept reading because I needed to hear her voice again, even if it was only words on paper. She told me she had no regrets about our life, and that if she could do it all over again, she would not change a single thing. She said dying was not as scary as leaving me behind, and that her only fear was that I would be lonely without her. Then the tone of the letter shifted, and I felt my stomach drop. She wrote, "There's something I've carried alone for our entire marriage, and I can't take it to my grave without you knowing the truth." My hands started shaking, and I had to stop reading for a moment to catch my breath. I looked up from the letter and stared at the wall, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming next. I thought maybe she was going to tell me she had been sick longer than she admitted, or that she had known about the cancer before she told me. I thought maybe she had kept some medical detail from me to protect me from worrying. My mind raced through possibilities, but none of them felt right because she had said this was something she carried for our entire marriage, not just the last few months. I forced myself to keep reading even though my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She wrote that she had lied to me about something important and that she had spent 40 years wondering if she should tell me the truth. She said she had almost told me 100 times, but she had always stopped herself because she was afraid of how it might change things between us. She apologized for keeping a secret and said she hoped I would understand why she did it once I knew everything. She said she had never meant to hurt me or deceive me, but that she had made a choice when she was young, and she had decided to live with that choice rather than burden me with it. She said she had carried the weight of this secret alone because she loved me too much to risk losing what we had. I felt panic rising in my chest because I had no idea what she was about to tell me. I thought about the woman I had been married to for 40 years, and I could not imagine what secret she could have kept from me that was so serious. She waited until after her death to reveal it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the pages, and I had to grip them tighter to keep reading. She wrote that she had not been honest with me about where she came from or who her family was. When we met, she told me her parents were dead and that she had no family left, and I believed her because she never talked about her past. She said she had grown up in foster care and bounced around between different homes and that she learned early on to take care of herself. I had felt sorry for her back then, and I promised myself I would give her the family and the home she never had. But that was a lie. She had not grown up in foster care at all. She had been born into a wealthy family with more money than I could have imagined. Her father owned manufacturing companies and real estate developments, and her mother came from old money that went back generations. She grew up in a mansion with servants and drivers and private tutors. She went to expensive private schools and wore designer clothes and vacationed in Europe every summer. She had everything money could buy, and she lived a life I could not even picture. She wrote that her parents had plans for her future before she was even born. They expected her to marry someone from another wealthy family, to strengthen business connections, and maintain their social status. When she turned 21, they introduced her to a man they had chosen for her. He was 35 years old and came from a family that owned banks and investment firms. Her parents told her the wedding was already being planned and that she would marry him within 6 months, whether she liked it or not. She said she had met this man twice, and both times he treated her like a possession he was purchasing rather than a person he wanted to know. He talked about her like she was not even in the room and made decisions about their future without asking her opinion. He told her parents that after they were married, she would quit her job and focus on hosting parties and raising children and representing his family name properly. She felt sick every time she thought about spending the rest of her life with him. She refused to marry him, and her parents were furious. They told her she was being selfish and ungrateful, and that she had a responsibility to the family. They said she had lived off their money her entire life, and now it was time to pay them back by doing what they asked. When she still refused, they gave her an ultimatum. Marry the man they chose or leave the family forever with nothing. She chose to leave. She packed a single suitcase with clothes and walked out of that mansion at 21 years old with $300 in her pocket. Her parents told her she was making the biggest mistake of her life and that she would come crawling back within a month. They said she had no skills and no experience and no idea how to survive in the real world. They told her she was cut off completely and that they would not give her a single dollar or speak to her name again. She wrote that leaving was the hardest thing she had ever done, but also the most freeing. She got a cheap apartment and found a job as a secretary and learned how to live on a tight budget. She said those first few months were terrifying because she had never paid a bill or bought groceries or worried about rent before. But she figured it out, and she was proud of herself for surviving on her own without her family's money. She met me 2 years after she left her family, and she said I was everything her parents would have hated. I was a construction worker with no college degree and no family money and no connections to anyone important. But I treated her with respect and kindness, and I made her laugh, and I never once asked her what she could do for me. She said she fell in love with me because I saw her as a person, not as a bank account or a status symbol. She never told me the truth because she wanted to be loved for who she was not, for the family name she had walked away from, or the money she had given up. She wrote that her parents had died 5 years ago in a car accident, and she had not even known about it until weeks later when a lawyer tracked her down. The lawyer told her that despite being disowned, she was still listed as the sole heir in their will because they had never had any other children. Everything they owned was being transferred to her, including properties and investments and trust funds that totaled millions of dollars. She said she sat in that lawyer's office in shock because she had not spoken to her parents in decades and she never expected to hear from them again. The lawyer explained that her parents had made the will years before she left and they had never bothered to change it. He said they probably assumed she would come back eventually, or maybe they thought she would die before they did. Either way, the will was legal and binding and everything was hers, whether she wanted it or not. He handed her folders full of documents showing bank accounts and stock portfolios and deeds to houses and commercial buildings. The numbers were so large she could barely understand what she was looking at. She wrote that she came home that day and sat at our kitchen table staring at the paperwork while I was at work. She said she thought about telling me right then, but she stopped herself because she was afraid. She was afraid I would think she had lied to me on purpose, or that I would feel betrayed because she had kept her past hidden for so long. She was afraid our children would look at her differently, or that our friends would treat us differently once they knew we had money. She was afraid that money would change everything good about our simple, quiet life. So she made a decision to keep it secret. She met with the lawyer privately and set up accounts in her name only, and made sure all the statements went to a post office box I did not know about. She never touched the money for herself or for our family. She said she did not want anything to change between us, and she did not want wealth to corrupt the life we had built together on our own. She wanted to keep living in our small house and shopping at thrift stores and eating simple meals because that life made her happy. But she did not let the money just sit there either. She used it quietly to help people who needed it more than we did. She donated to homeless shelters and food banks and cancer research. She funded college scholarships for kids who could not afford tuition. She paid medical bills for families drowning in debt, and she bought school supplies for underfunded classrooms. She gave money to animal rescues and women's shelters and addiction recovery programs. Every month she would write checks and send them anonymously so nobody would know where the money came from. She wrote that helping others gave her more joy than spending money on herself ever could have. She said she thought about her own parents and how they had used their wealth to control people and buy status, and she decided she would do the opposite. She would use the money to lift people up instead of keeping them down. She said it felt like she was correcting her family's mistakes and turning something selfish into something good. She hired a financial advisor who managed everything and made sure the money kept growing. She set up automatic donations to dozens of charities, and she never told anyone, including me, what she was doing. She lived her double life for 5 years, and she said it was exhausting keeping such a big secret, but she convinced herself it was worth it. She told herself she was protecting our marriage and our family from the complications that money brings. She never bought herself anything expensive, and she never suggested we upgrade our lifestyle or move to a nicer house. She kept working at the law firm until she retired, and she kept clipping coupons and shopping sales like we were still struggling to make ends meet. She said she never felt like the money belonged to her anyway because she had not earned it, and she had walked away from that family decades ago. She wrote that everything was now mine and that she had spent the last few months of her life making sure it would transfer to me without any problems. She had met with her lawyer dozens of times while I thought she was going to doctor's appointments. She updated all the paperwork and made sure my name was on everything and gave the lawyer detailed instructions about what should happen after she died. She said she worked harder on organizing her estate than she had ever worked on anything because she wanted to make sure I would be taken care of. The lawyer had copies of every document, and he was waiting for me to contact him whenever I was ready. She wrote his name and phone number at the bottom of the page and told me not to wait too long because there were time-sensitive things that needed my signature. She said the lawyer knew everything, and he would answer all my questions and help me understand what I now owned. She told me to trust him because she had vetted him carefully and knew he would treat me with respect. She had set aside money specifically for our children and our grandchildren in accounts they could access when they turned 25. She said she did not want them to have too much money too young because she had seen what wealth did to spoiled children in her own family. She wanted them to work hard and build their own lives first before they had access to money that could make them lazy or entitled. She wrote out exact amounts for each of them and explained her reasoning for the numbers she chose. She had also set aside large donations for causes she cared about deeply. She wanted money to go to the hospital where she received her cancer treatment so they could help other patients who could not afford care. She wanted money to go to the homeless shelter downtown where we had volunteered together on Thanksgiving for the past 10 years. She wanted money to fund scholarships at the community college where our daughter had gotten her degree. She had written detailed instructions about how much each organization should receive and what the money should be used for. But most of the money was mine to do with as I saw fit. She said she trusted my judgment completely, and she knew I would make good decisions about how to use it. She said I had always been wise with money even when we had almost nothing, and she believed I would be just as wise now that we had more than we could ever spend. She told me not to feel guilty about having wealth and not to feel pressured to give it all away if I did not want to. She wrote that I deserved to enjoy some of it and treat myself to things I had always wanted but could never afford. She said I should take that trip to Ireland I had always talked about, or buy the truck I had been looking at for years, or fix up the house the way I wanted. She said I had worked hard my entire life and sacrificed constantly for our family, and now I finally had the freedom to stop worrying about money. She wanted me to feel peace and security and know that I would never have to struggle again. She also told me I could share the truth with our children or keep it private if I preferred. She said it was my decision to make, and she would support whatever I chose. She wrote that our kids were good people with good hearts, and they would probably handle the news well, but she understood if I wanted time to process everything alone first. She said there was no rush and no wrong way to handle any of this. She apologized again for keeping such a massive secret and said she hoped I would forgive her once I understood her reasons. She said she knew it was a lot to take in, and that I probably felt confused and maybe even angry. She told me to take all the time I needed to work through my feelings and reminded me that she had made these choices out of love, not out of deception or malice. My eyes were blurred with tears as I reached the final paragraph, and I had to wipe them away multiple times just to keep reading. Her handwriting had gotten shakier toward the end of the letter, like she was running out of strength or time or both. Some of the words were smudged where her tears had fallen on the page while she was writing. I could picture her sitting in our bed late at night crying as she tried to explain 40 years of secrecy in just a few pages. She wrote that she had been terrified to tell me the truth for decades because she thought it might change how I saw her. She said she worried I would feel like our entire marriage had been built on a lie, or that I would question whether anything between us had been real. She was afraid I would wonder if she had been testing me all along or playing some kind of cruel game to see if I really loved her. She said those fears had kept her silent, even when she wanted desperately to be honest. She wrote that watching me work so hard for so many years while she secretly had millions of dollars had been the most painful part. She said there were nights when I came home exhausted from working 2 jobs, and she almost broke down and told me we did not have to struggle anymore. She said she hated seeing me worry about money and stress about bills when she could have written a check to solve all our problems in seconds. But she stopped herself every time because she knew that taking the easy path would have changed something fundamental between us. She said she had fallen in love with me because I chose her when she had nothing to offer except herself. She said I worked multiple jobs to provide for our family without ever complaining or making her feel guilty. She said I treated her like a queen even when we were eating cheap pasta and living in a house with a leaking roof. She said my love had never depended on what she could give me or what she could do for me, and that was the most precious gift anyone had ever given her. She wrote that her parents had taught her that love was transactional and that people only cared about you if you had something valuable to offer them. They had shown her that relationships were built on money and status and power. But I had proven them wrong every single day for 40 years. I had loved her when we had nothing, and I had stayed loyal to her through sickness and hardship and every challenge life threw at us. I had never asked for more than she could give, and I had never made her feel like she owed me anything. She said she was sorry for doubting my love, even for a second, but that her childhood had damaged her in ways that took decades to heal. She said keeping the secret had been her way of protecting the one pure thing in her life from the corruption she had seen money cause in her own family. She said she would rather live simply with real love than live in luxury with fake relationships like her parents had. Then I reached the last line, and it hit me so hard I felt like I could not breathe. My hands started trembling violently, and I had to read the words 3 times to make sure I understood what she was saying. She had written in shaky letters that were barely legible, "I never told you about the money because you married me when I had nothing, and that's how I knew your love was real." I dropped the letter and collapsed forward with my face in my hands. My whole body shook as I sobbed harder than I had cried even at her funeral. She had tested nothing and doubted nothing, but she had carried this weight alone for 40 years, just to preserve the purity of what we had together. She had watched me struggle and sacrifice, and work myself to exhaustion, all so she could be absolutely certain that I loved her for her, and not for anything else. She had died knowing I passed a test I did not even know I was taking. I collapsed onto our bed, clutching the letter to my chest, and I could not stop sobbing. The grief I had been holding back since her funeral finally broke through and poured out of me in waves that left me gasping for air. I cried for the woman who had loved me so completely that she gave up millions of dollars just to make sure my love was genuine. I cried for the 40 years she spent carrying this secret alone while I lived my life thinking we had shared everything. I cried because she was gone, and I could never tell her that her test had been unnecessary because I would have loved her no matter what. I thought about all the times I had complained about money problems, or worried about making rent, or stressed about unexpected expenses. She had sat there listening to me worry, while knowing she could solve every problem with a single phone call to her lawyer. She had watched me work myself into exhaustion and come home with aching muscles, and she never once suggested we take the easy way out. The strength it must have taken to stay silent through all of that was something I could barely comprehend. I felt angry for a moment because she had let me struggle when she could have helped. I thought about the times I skipped meals to make sure the kids had enough food, and the times I worked double shifts to pay for their school supplies, and the time I put off going to the doctor because we could not afford the bill. She could have stopped all of that suffering with one conversation, but she chose not to, and part of me wanted to scream at her for it, even though she was already gone. But then, I read the letter again, and I understood. She had not been cruel or selfish. She had been protecting something more valuable than money or comfort or an easy life. She had been protecting the truth of our love. If she had told me about the money when we first met, I might have treated her differently without even realizing it. I might have been more eager to impress her, or more conscious of my own poverty compared to her wealth. Our relationship might have had an imbalance that neither of us could fix. By keeping the secret, she had given me the gift of knowing that every moment between us had been completely real. Every sacrifice I made had been out of love, not out of obligation or expectation of reward. Every time I held her hand or kissed her goodnight or told her I loved her, it had been genuine and untainted by money or status or anything except pure feeling. She had given me 40 years of authentic love, where I never had to question my own motives or wonder if I was being honest with myself. I realized she had trusted me more than I had ever trusted myself. She had watched me be the man I wanted to be without any corruption or shortcuts. She had let me build a life I could be proud of, where I knew I had earned everything through my own hard work and dedication. She had given me the dignity of being a provider and a father and a husband without ever making me feel like I was not enough. That was a gift I had not even known I needed. I looked around our bedroom and saw it differently now. The modest furniture and the simple decorations and the worn carpet were not signs of poverty, but signs of choice. We could have lived in a mansion, but we chose this small house. We could have eaten at expensive restaurants, but we chose home-cooked meals. We could have taken luxury vacations, but we chose quiet weekends at home. Every choice we made together had been free from the pressure of money, and that made them all more meaningful. I thought about her sitting in this same bed writing this letter and knowing she was dying. She had used her last bit of strength to tell me the truth and explain her reasons and ask for my forgiveness. She had died, hoping I would understand and not hate her for the secret she kept. She had gone into death worried that she had done the wrong thing, when really she had done the most loving thing anyone had ever done for me. I kept our small house, and I still live here now 5 years after she died. I could have bought a mansion or moved to a wealthy neighborhood, but this house holds 40 years of memories, and I cannot bring myself to leave. I fixed the roof that leaked and replaced the old furnace and updated the kitchen, but I kept everything else exactly the way it was. Her coffee cup is still in the cabinet, and her chair at the table is still in the same spot, and I still sleep on my side of the bed, even though the other side is empty. I called her lawyer the week after I read the letter, and he walked me through everything. The numbers were staggering, and I had trouble wrapping my head around how much money I now controlled. He showed me all the charitable donations she had been making for years, and the scholarships she had funded, and the families she had helped. I saw years of bank statements showing thousands of dollars going out every month to organizations I had never heard of. She had quietly changed hundreds of lives while living like we were still counting pennies. I decided to honor her generosity by continuing what she started, but doing it in her name instead of anonymously. I funded a scholarship program at our local high school called the Sarah Memorial Fund for students who wanted to go to college but had no money. I donated to the Cancer Research Center that tried to save her life and asked them to name a wing after her. I gave money to the homeless shelter where we volunteered, and they put her name on a plaque by the front door. I also started funding things she had always wanted to do but never could because we were too busy pretending to be poor. She had always talked about opening a community center for low-income families, but we never had the resources to make it happen. Now I had the resources, so I built it and named it after her and filled it with programs for kids and parents who needed help. She would have loved seeing children learning music and art and sports in a building that carried her name. Our children learned the truth from the letter she had written specifically for them. I gathered them together 6 months after her funeral and gave them the letters she had left in sealed envelopes with their names on them. They read about their mother's real family and the wealth she had walked away from and the fortune she had hidden for decades. They cried and they were shocked, and they asked me 100 questions I did not have answers to. But they understood why she did it once they processed everything. Our daughter said it made sense now why Mom always told her that money did not matter and that character was more important than wealth. Our son said he finally understood why Mom always insisted they work for everything they wanted instead of just giving them things. They both said they were proud of her for choosing love over money and for protecting our family from the corruption she had seen in her own childhood. They said they would have made the same choice if they were in her position. I still get letters from students who received scholarships from the fund I created in her name. They tell me about their dreams and their struggles and how the money changed their lives. They send me graduation photos and thank you cards, and sometimes they stop by the house to tell me in person how much it meant to have someone believe in them. Every letter reminds me that my wife's money is doing more good now than it ever did sitting in her family's bank accounts. I think about her every single day, and I still talk to her sometimes when I am alone in the house. I tell her about the people we helped and the lives we changed, and how her legacy is spreading further than she ever imagined. I tell her I understand why she kept the secret and that I forgive her, even though there is nothing to forgive. I tell her that her last line in that letter broke me and healed me at the same time because it proved that our love was real and pure and untouchable by money or time or even death. She hid millions for 40 years just to be sure I loved her, not her money, and the last line of her letter proved she always knew.